Hey guys, this is Sid Patel, CEO of Beverage Trade Network and USA Ratings. We are live from San Francisco at USA Spirits Ratings, and I have Zachary Faden here, one of the leading bartenders of the country, who works from Washington DC, and we're going to have a great conversation about bourbon trends and how to sell your bourbon effectively in distribution and in bars, with Zach. Zach, thanks for joining me here.
Thank you very much, sir.
I want to also mention, some of the wins that you've had, right? So you are 2022 Woodford Reserve Manhattan Experience finalist, 2019 Top 100 finalist in Tales of Cocktail, 2019 Woodford Reserve Manhattan Experience finalist, 2017 Tales of Cocktail competition winner, right? And I'm sure there may be more. So one of the things that I see is deep knowledge of bourbon. Yes. Let's go on really, defining and seeing the trends. I mean, we all know that bourbon is really hot, and it's been that for 5 years now. But what are your takes on 2024? What categories are you seeing are still going to grow? And that way, people who are, especially the distillers,
certainly.
What's your recommendation for which kind of profiles they should make for 2024?
Certainly. Historically, our national spirit was rye, but that, currently it's definitely bourbon. I think that, it's intricately associated with the United States as our, one of our cultural exports. So I think that kind of just, you kind of had the revival of a kind of Mad Men bringing it all back, the cocktail renaissance, and there's kind of people drinking and being exposed to it. During the pandemic, a lot of people were, willing to kind of do affordable luxury, trying to buy nicer bottles at home, realizing that if they were to, go to a bar, which they couldn't at the time, the price of that service would be, definitely opening up the window to be able to get a bottle and be able to try things at home. So I think it definitely is pushing the category, that affordable luxury. The last few years, Blanton's in particular, has gone just skyrockets in popularity. So it's, been around since 1984. It's a single barrel bourbon, the first of its kind. But then the popularity, whether it's just fame on the internet, product placements in different, movies and series, but that has the scarcity of that, and then also the demand for that, the price of that's gone up, and then the consumer demand for that hasn't really been any really conflict with that rising price to kind of meet that supply and demand curve.
So let's say if you were a distiller, right? If you were adding more SKUs to your bourbon portfolio, what kind of profiles, what kind of price range, what would you recommend?
Certainly. I think that actually going a little bit more towards the higher entry point, I think that there's,
you still are bullish on that?
Yes, I think I'm still bullish on that. I think there's might be a bubble there, but I don't see that bursting for another at least 10 years. I think especially with the exposure that consumers had during the pandemic. And then, like I said, I think that kind of skewing towards the, willing to splurge on a little bit higher one. Maybe you can't get a new house, maybe you can't get a new car, but you can still splurge and get that affordable luxury of a nicer bottle of bourbon. So, instead of just getting a bottle, an everyday sipper for, $30 to $40, maybe you're getting a bottle for $100 to $200. And I also think that the higher end, higher age statements, limited, scarcity ones. So kind of the serial releases have been very, very popular. Blood Oath, the Orphan Barrels, Whistle Pig, kind of anything that's kind of offered kind of a one-off one. Trying just new heritage, grains. So Weller's coming out with an Egyptian wheat whiskey that already has taken everyone by surprise and storm, even though no one's tasted it yet. Koval out of Chicago is doing just some traditional grains and kind of more unique ones. Getting American white corn, getting American red corn, kind of so different expressions. So I think kind of just pushing the boundary of what bourbon is and can be. So bourbon's currently made in all 50 states. It's not just Kentucky, it's not just Tennessee. All 50 states are making it. And then also I think one of the trends that I'm seeing is barrel finishes. So there was a big controversy, lawsuit, and evolution of the category, kind of around Angel's Envy and some of their other competitors putting out cask finishes, which is very common in the Scotch world, but not very common in the bourbon world. I think it's becoming much more common. Jack Daniel's just put out a twice barreled one. Parker Heritage also has one, and I think that's kind of the trend of kind of figuring out how to complement and how to expand the initial distillation aging process with a secondary cask finish.
Got it. What about the markets and opportunities, right? So let's go on which states you think are consuming more, and are you expecting more growth? And even countries, like, if you were seeing Asia, maybe checking on, or UK? Where are some opportunities?
Yeah, certainly. So I mean, kind of, you go back like 20 years ago, the bourbon community was much, much smaller. And it was pretty much you're either, from Kentucky, you're Japanese, or you kind of had this kind of like outlaw kind of persona. And that, drastically changed. Some of the biggest and most storied brands in America are around today because of Japanese investment, specifically the Beam Suntory group. And so I think that, the whiskey community in Japan is definitely very, very strong.
So they're still very connected with U.S.
Yes.
bourbon.
Yeah, so they just celebrated 100 years of Japanese whiskey distillation, but they also have a very strong relationship with American whiskey as well.
Okay.
There's still a number of export-only bottles that are made in Kentucky or made elsewhere in the United States that are only exported primarily to Japan. Sometimes there's a few other Asian countries that are involved there as well.
Okay.
But the bourbon community is still very strong and growing in Japan. China is an emerging market kind of for all spirits. So it's definitely had inroads with the high-end luxury products there. But I think there's also just kind of, possibility to have kind of more of an everyday drinker. The current politics are kind of putting a downward spin on kind of the general consumption of alcohol that had been definitely growing for several generations before that. So I still think that there's definitely a market for it. It might have to depend on future politics. I think the current political relationship with excessive drinking or more celebratory social drinking is going to be curtailing that as an overall one. But I still think that there's been a desire for it, and as the upper and upper middle classes in China are growing, I think there's still going to be private consumption. There might not be as much government support of that, and then there may be at some point of a shift to kind of more national spirits like baijiu. Also, like Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy is pushing the production of Chinese wines. So there may be a shift to kind of doing more kind of national products that they're pushing for government usage. So that's going to be a huge benefactor that I don't think the American growth bourbon community can count on anymore.
True.
But I still think that as their economy is still rising, as there are still millions coming up into the upper middle classes and the very wealthy, I still think that the category of American bourbon as a status symbol is still very strong.
What about the U.S. states? Like which three states you would pick as your top growth states?
Yeah, I mean, for like top growth states, I mean, Texas is kind of exploding with just production of bourbon, and it's just kind of taking that on. Like Wisconsin, California, New York are kind of all historically kind of just very large consumers. And then I also think that just the fact that, like I had mentioned before, all 50 states are making bourbon, and there's going to be definitely a strong push of being able to buy and then also sell to the local communities the local products. That while it's it's the designation is national, I think being able to support a local distillery from your state or from a neighboring state is going to be a strong push.
Got it. On the last topic, where if you're a bourbon brand and trying to pitch into a bar, so let's help them by giving them a guidance of what kind of bars you have a high conversion rate chance. So at least then you can tell them that these are the kind of bars that they would buy, and then what would be a good pitch, good way to introduce your bourbon brand.
Certainly. So I kind of have to figure out is there going to be a cocktail program there? Is there going to be trying to need kind of what the food pairings there? So classically, the traditional ones would be red meat. So you have your big cabs and your big Bordeaux, and then also your large whiskey lists at steakhouses. But I think that the consumer is kind of moved past that. That they can kind of move that anywhere. So any traditional meat heavy pairing dishes would work really, really well with that. So barbecue places could be a really good option. If they do a cocktail program, the old fashioned has always been an international drink beverage lists, like top 10 spirits sold annually. It's quick to make, it's easy, it can be delicious, and it's also a really good opportunity for a producer to pitch a lower cost product and just have really good margins there. An old fashioned, it's basically a fancy shot that you sip, so you're rectifying it. So even if it's not a perfect, mind-blowing expression of bourbon, as long as it's good, you're adding syrup to it, you're adding bitters to it, you're diluting it, and it kind of helps definitely craft that. And then if you can put that that $8 to $12 price point, some of the higher end markets $15 to $20, and if you're be able to get a bottle for at wholesale cost under $20, $25, the margins are just absolutely phenomenal. Any one running the bar program, any restaurateur is going to see that and is going to know that it's an easy drink to make. You can produce a lot of them. Nothing is going to spoil in that production. It's really, really good. I also think that just kind of bourbon as a status symbol I think that any high-end restaurant, regardless of the type of cuisine or the nationality they're representing, can still have a higher end offering for after dinner drinks. So I mean, I think that the shift away from Scotch and cognac being the traditional way to end a meal, I think that bourbon is much more likely to do that, whether it's an American cuisine or any other one, as long as I think there's some cachet and some the certain spending levels of the consumers there. I think that they'd be open to having a high-end whiskey with coffee or after their meal.
On the pitch, right? Like, what do usually bartenders or even off-trade buyers would want to hear, when they're listening to a bourbon story?
Certainly. So, I mean, a bourbon story is absolutely fantastic. I mean, as much as the bottle and much as the liquid is going to sell itself, the story does. So I think there's definitely, I think authenticity is very true. There's so many stories of like, oh, I found this recipe. It's my great grandfather's recipe in in his sock drawer, and no one really believes that anymore.
Yeah.
So I mean, just having this absolute transparency of like, it's a mash bill that we like. We have it distilled in Indiana. We're bottling it. Our plan is in 4 to 6 years to be having your own distillate. Be transparent. So I think that everything that Nicholas Palazzi at PM Spirits does is being open and aware that Bardstown is a newer one that just has extremely well funded and putting things out. So they just released their Origin series, which is their 6-year-old whiskeys. But before they did that, they were still wanting to be economically viable. So they would purchase other their friends' distillates and kind of do blends and different variations on that. But every time they did that, they're entirely transparent and open with what the process was. Now that they're making their own whiskey, they can say that it's their own whiskey now. I don't think the consumer wants to believe the myth anymore, and I think that they're too savvy now to be lied to. And I think that that brand loyalty would be immediately shattered. So whatever you're doing, have a good story, but then also be honest.